All right, welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of the EB-5 Insight podcast. Today, we're joined by esteemed immigration attorney Indy Sidhu, who has been practicing immigration law for over 20 years, focusing her practice on business and investment immigration law. Indy has assisted a diverse client base, including startups, IT, biotechnology, financial services, medical practices, and private investment banks and equity firms, while working with both private high net worth and corporate clients. Indy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, today's topic is a good one. We're going to dive a little bit into the Trump administration's overall approach to immigration and, the ways in which you feel the administration is affecting both temporary and permanent visa types, such as EB-5. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just jump right into our questions.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good.
So when you sort of zoom out, how would you describe overall the Trump administration's philosophy toward immigration, and where does investor-based visa types, such as EB-5, fit within their philosophy?
Yeah, I agree. This is like a very topical discussion, especially with everything that's going on, and there is a lot of concerns in terms of how do I think the Trump administration views immigration. It's restrictive. In my opinion, they view it as restrictive. There's certain demographic, certain type of, non-immigrant and immigrants that they're focusing on, and the administration during the election was really focused on, I think, the restricting illegality. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing it more applied across the board. And unfortunately, what that leads to is, I think, an unequal or inequitable processing. And that's really what I'm seeing with the current administration. Do I hope it'll become less restrictive and, go back to what, the U.S. represents? Absolutely. But I think right now they're continuing with that restrictive agenda, unfortunately.
Right. Well, so these, permanent visa types like EB-5, they rely really heavily on long-term confidence in, U.S. immigration being stable and ideally not overly restrictive. So, I guess you've sort of addressed this question already, but do you see any of Trump's rhetoric impacting foreign investors' willingness to commit capital to, an EB-5 investment?
So yes and no. And, most attorneys, we give those yes and no answers. Am I seeing a chilling effect? Not necessarily. Right? There's investors who are still interested in the EB-5 program. The EB-5 program works for them and their family better than the introduction of, the gold visa or the platinum visa. A lot of my EB-5 clients are still very much, step back, a lot of the investor clients are still heavily focused on the EB-5 program because, again, it is a program, it is legislated, so it's, Congress did pass, the statutes that frame the program itself. We don't have that with the gold or platinum visa that's being introduced, right? So we're in an unknown, and that creates additional risk. And we can dive into the gold and platinum versus the EB-5 as well, but I'm not seeing a chilling effect. One thing that we are making clients aware of is, there's a deadline coming up this year, September 30th, 2026 for grandfathering. We want to make sure that they understand what that means, especially for, those investors who have children who are 14, 15, 18, who might age out, right? And age out is so if, the age out itself is it's a risk that a lot of parents see with their children. However, the RIA addressed that. And what age out is when your child reaches the age of 21 and over, they're no longer going to be considered as part of your application process. They would have to do something independent. But the Act actually addressed that and protected any of their children that might be potentially aging out, right? So those protections are going to go away September 30th, 2026, as of now. Whether it gets extended closer to the date, we don't know. But that's our current deadline that we're working on in terms of the current period process, and that's where we're really focusing our clients' attention.
Right,
There,
right. I do want to circle back to the sunsetting of the program, and
yeah.
we'll definitely touch on the gold and platinum visas as well. I guess the current administration, they've really been framing immigration through a national security lens. Even, I mean, I think we've all seen what's been happening recently. Again, we're already discussing this, but how does that narrative of looking at things through a national security lens, how does that really influence the scrutiny of foreign investors, or even those seeking more temporary visa types? What are you seeing there?
So I think the national security lens, that's a talking point for them. That's a focus, because people will, that resonates with individuals, right? But the program itself does go through rigorous screening. Individuals do go through rigorous screening, right?
Right.
When it comes to the EB-5 investment, there's a deep dive into the source of the funds. We want to make sure that the funds are from legitimate sources. It's not some sort of laundering scheme, right? And that requires us, as practitioners, those who represent clients. It also requires the EB-5, regional center, and the investor to ensure that we have all our ducks in a row. And that means that, and I always say this to clients, is the biggest, one of the biggest issues we need to always make sure we're aware of is source of funds. You have to follow the money. So if your money is coming from your grandparents, well, we need to know, where did your grandparents get that money that they're going to gift you, right? If you're obtaining a loan, we need to know, is the loan at risk? Are you at risk with that loan? Like, what are the loan requirements for it? And if you're using your 401k, or you're using some investment portfolio, we need to know, where did you invest the money in order for it to grow? And we have to go back 7 years. Can you imagine giving 7 years of your financials?
Right.
And if you're using, and if a company, you own a company, and the company is going to be providing the source, then we need to not only have your personal funds, personal 7 years, we need the company's 7 years, and need to show, is the company still active? Where did the company get the money? Where's their revenue stream? It's a very deep dive into, so the concept of, this is a national security issue. The program itself is already pretty extensive in terms of documentation we need to provide. There's within, the act itself is built in how much funds can be appropriated for investigation for fraud. That's just one piece of it. And then you look at the individuals who have to go through extensive background checks. They have to go to get fingerprinting, disclose where they've lived for the number of years. It's pretty extensive. So the idea of, the narrative, this is for national security, I understand, but what I think the average individual doesn't see is that it is a pretty extensive background check that gets done, just not on the financials, but on the individuals. And then, of course, the regional centers have to go through their own annual audits as well, right? So all three of the individuals, you go through an extensive review.
Right, right. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit, and
Sure.
thinking exclusively about EB-5, do you think any of the current Trump era policies or rhetoric is disproportionately affecting EB-5 investors from certain countries, through either heightened scrutiny or through processing delays?
Absolutely. I think the countries that have been listed through executive orders, there's been a pause in some of the processing. on those. What we're seeing also is at the consulates, appointments are being delayed or appointments are being canceled and you know, and moved forward. And the risk for some of those at the consular processing, especially, is when the interview date gets canceled. Like they have to do an interview within a period of time, otherwise that application becomes stale. But if the consulate itself is not, is not scheduling an appointment, that I think is going to have an impact on for how long can that counselor appointment, that individual, for how long is that benefit going to be open before the file gets closed? And so then that is going to be problematic. I think, if you file within the U.S. an adjustment of status concurrent with your I-526E petition for immigrant investor, there's more room for redressability, right? We can use the court systems and the appellate system, so procedural systems in place to work out the potential issues that might be there.
Right.
But it's more problematic with counseling.
Sure. Yeah, we speak all the time to investors who are overseas going through that, the NVC or the consular process, and are just dealing with enormous delays in getting their interview scheduled. Whereas, if you're in the United States, you can file concurrently, EADs and the APs can get issued relatively quickly so that you can work and travel to likely the extent you were before. So, there's no question it can be a frustrating process from overseas.
Right.
I want to shift gears. We touched a little bit on the gold and platinum visa concepts, and I want to just bring some clarity to those because, we as a regional center, and I'm sure yourself as an immigration attorney, field questions relating to them all the time. But, when compared to something like EB-5, which requires capital to be at risk in a U.S. business, with the expectation of a return of capital, whereas proposed gold or platinum visas resemble, a non-refundable payment to the U.S. government, essentially a donation. From a policy perspective, how meaningful and important is it to make that distinction between the two?
I think it's really important. There's the other distinction that we have to make is also who's covered in terms of family members, right? So EB-5 petition, you have your principal investor and their dependents are covered in that petition. Of course, if there's children, we have to look at the age out component that we spoke about.
Right.
But they're covered, right? Under the gold. I don't know if we've gotten as much on the platinum, but under the gold, like they have released the form that should be filed. If you look at it and look at even the executive order is silent on it, but the form isn't, in that there's the principal investment of $1 million, and then if you have spouses or children, it's an additional. So it's per person, not per family. Right. And that is a very big difference. So that's why EB-5 continues to make sense, because you're protecting your whole family. That one investment takes care of the family unit. Whereas the gold visa, it is first you have to register online, be approved, and then when you file, you have to file, individually for each family member, and that is problematic. That is more than one, and I don't think it's advertised that way. That it's per person. One assumes $1 million is going to bring the whole family, and it doesn't. Right. So that's always. I think we need to look at the framework. The other thing is the gold visa and the platinum visa. It's through an executive order. It's not through the legislative branch, and when you're creating a new visa category, you have to go through the legislative branch, and that hasn't happened. So there's from a processing policy perspective, I mean, it's such an unknown that it would be remiss of myself to not advise clients about how, how problematic it possibly could be. Again, our role is to provide as much information as we have to them. And if we have limited information, we can only provide limited information, but for the client to make an informed decision.
Right, right. So it sounds like, when it comes to clearly differentiating a visa type like EB-5 from these gold or platinum visas, you know, there's features of the program within EB-5, the return of capital, the job creation, regional targeting, and of course, you're talking about the advantage of being able to bring in your entire family as, with just one principal investor, which doesn't exist within the other visa types. It's important to really clearly differentiate those factors, correct?
Absolutely. And if I could add to what you just said, so the EB-5 program is supposed to help local, right? Rural area infrastructure, TE areas. I mean, it's supposed to build the economy, the engine, right? It's an infusion within those localities. We don't know what the gold visa or the platinum visa investments are going to be. Like, we don't know where that's going to be invested and how that's going to impact economies locally with it. So even from a local, benefit the EB-5 has, it helps those communities where there is a regional center or a job creating enterprise in the rural areas where they typically won't get investment, but are now getting that infusion to help that economy grow.
Right, right. Well, yeah, I think, there's clearly some certain advantages to the permanent visa types like EB-5 when compared to, some of the newer visa types like we're discussing here.
Yeah.
And, I think overall there's probably a lot up in the air at the moment as far as, immigration policy under the current administration. But, I'd just like to thank you, Attorney Indy, for being here today, for chatting with us. Before I let you go, do you want to let any of our viewers know where they can find you and contact you for immigration counsel?
Sure. The best is to go online to our website. It's www.indysidhu.com. Pretty easy, INDYSIDHU.com. And there's a 50-minute or 30-minute consult you can schedule with us yourself, which is convenient for your time. And yeah, we'll be more than happy to speak with them and, understand what their objective is and work towards that.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, Indy, thank you so much again for joining us today, and have a great one.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the EB-5 Insight podcast. A special thank you to immigration attorney Indy Sidhu for sharing her perspective on how the current administration's policies, national security framing, and evolving visa proposals are impacting investors. From EB-5 applicants navigating source of funds scrutiny and consular delays, to families weighing the differences between EB-5 and newer gold visa concepts. If you found this conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss future discussions where we break down the latest immigration developments with leading attorneys and industry experts. And if you know someone considering the EB-5 program or exploring U.S. investment-based immigration options, share this episode with them. It could provide valuable clarity as they evaluate their path forward. I'm Simon Weiner, and this is the EB-5 Insight Podcast. We'll see you next time.